Welcome to Heart of a Shepherd. We are studying two chapters from the book of Psalms today, Psalm 128 and then Psalm 129. And so this is the first of two daily video devotionals. Now, this one from Psalm 128 is titled Home, Sweet Home, a Family Portrait. Now, you're going to notice that Psalm 128 continues our study of the Psalms titled A Song of Degrees. Now, those begin in Psalm 120 through Psalm 134. This psalm, like the others, is a hymn of rejoicing in the Lord's blessings. Now, the main focus of the psalm is the promise of the Lord's blessings on the household of the man who fears the Lord and walks in his way. You're going to notice in Psalm 128 that there are three portraits of a blessed family. We could almost say three generations, actually. The first family portrait is in the first three verses, which I would title A Fruitful Vine. Now, here we see a woman who, under the influence of her husband's love and spiritual devotion, is described as a fruitful vine, a source of happiness for her husband. Let's read Psalm 128, verses 1 through 3. Blessed or happy is everyone that feareth or reveres the Lord, that walketh in his ways. For thou shalt eat the labor of thine hands. Happy shalt thou be, and it shall be well or pleasant with thee. Now verse 3, Thy wife shall be as a fruitful vine by the sides of thine house, and thy children like olive plants round about thy table. You know, there isn't a man or woman who doesn't long for happiness. Some seek affirmation as a way to find happiness, but discover that trophies and plaques and applause never truly satisfy. Others try to find happiness by climbing the corporate ladder in pursuit of success, wealth, and possessions, only to realize that none of it brings lasting contentment. And sadly, the happiness the world offers is fleeting and ultimately unfulfilling. And so why does the psalmist portray as a symbol of happiness, who does the psalmist portray as a symbol of happiness and success? And the answer is those who fear the Lord and walk in his ways, verse 2. Now, such a person is promised they will enjoy the fruit of their labor. Now that man's household will be blessed, and we find the promise that his wife, like a fruitful vine, that is a symbol of a giver of life, will bear him sons and daughters. Now the second family portrait begins at the latter part of verse 3 through verse 4, and I would title this portrait, Children Like Olive Trees. And so we read at the conclusion of verse 3, Thy children like olive plants round about thy table. Behold, verse 4, that thus shall the man be blessed that feareth the Lord. Now, the second family portrait in our study shows the household of the man who fears and respects the Lord. Now, he and his wife, already described in verse 3 as a fruitful vine, are blessed with sons and daughters. Now, unlike households where children grow up to become unruly weeds, the children of those who fear the Lord are like olive trees. They sit around the table and are taught, groomed, nurtured in God's law and commandments. Deuteronomy 6, 4 through 9 would be an illustration of that. And then we finally read in verse 4, they grow up to be a blessing. Now the third portrait is found in verses 5 through 6, and this family portrait is the contentment of three generations. We read in verse 5, The Lord shall bless thee out of Zion. Now Zion was the mountain upon which the temple was built. And shalt see the good of Jerusalem all the days of thy life. Yea, thou shalt see thy children's children, your grandchildren, and peace upon Israel. Now the temple on Mount Zion was certainly a majestic symbol of the Lord's presence in Israel. Now it served as a constant reminder of God's promise that Israel would thrive if the people feared the Lord and followed his law and commandments. And so there we have three family portraits in our study. And they really tell the sum of a man's life. In his youth, he chose to fear the Lord and live according to his ways, verse 1 and 2. His household in those middle years was then blessed with children. And then the final portrait. We find the man in verse 5, old and hunched over. Now, although his body was weak, his spirit remained strong, and he longed to see God's blessings upon his household and Israel as a nation. Now, because the Lord is the rewarder of those who love and fear him, the old man in this portrait, the third portrait, verse 6, we find he was promised, yea, thou shalt see, that is, you'll look and you'll discern thy children's children, your grandchildren, and peace, shalom, prosperity upon Israel. Note, as a closing thought, the third family portrait shows contentment, and the last verse acts as a blessing. With we, you and I, we all desire to enjoy the Lord's blessings and for our homes to reflect his shalom, his peace. We hope to live long enough to see our children's children. And like the psalmist, we also long for our country to return to the Lord to experience shalom, the peace and prosperity of the Lord. And then finally, as we consider verse 1 again, the above are all admirable goals. However, they're only promised to those who fear the Lord and walk in his ways. Thank you for being a part of our study. A second video will follow that will consider Psalm 129. God bless.